The ceremony took place at dawn, when the dying sun cast the crystal spires of Kethvara in shades of gold and violet. Representatives from dozens of species had gathered in the great hall, summoned by messages that spoke of something unprecedented. In Galactic HFY stood before the assembled crowd wearing formal robes that bore both human and Varick symbols. Beside her stood Vrex, Kitha, and Sorn, their shells gleaming with health after days of proper Karasithreka rose from her throne, and the hall fell silent. For 10,000 years, the Varricks have walked alone. The matriarch began. We have conquered, and we have killed. And we have trusted no one beyond our own kind. She moved towards Seojin with slow, deliberate steps. We called other species weak because they showed compassion, and we called them foolish because they helped those who could offer nothing in return. She stopped before Seojin and looked down at the human woman who had changed everything. We were wrong. A murmur ran through the crowd, and Seojin saw shock on the faces of aliens who had never expected to hear such words from a Variks. Ambassador Yoon. Seojin came to us as a stranger. Sithreka continued. She was small and soft and possessed no weapon that could threaten even a cub. Yet when my children needed protection, she offered her life without hesitation. When they needed care, she stayed awake through the night to provide it. When they needed love, she gave it freely and asked for nothing in return. The matriarch turned to face the assembly. This is the strength that humans carry, she declared, not in their bodies, but in their hearts. She raised her voice until it echoed from the crystal walls. Today, I name Yoon Seojin as Neskin of the Variks people. The shock that followed was palpable. Neskin was the highest honor the Variks could bestow. A bond of family that had never in all their history been offered to an outsider. This means that humanity stands under Variks' protection. Sithreka continued. An attack on humans is an attack on us, and our warriors will answer as though our own. Blood had been spilled. The Thelmari ambassador had gone very pale. Others in the crowd exchanged worried glances as they calculated what this alliance might mean for the balance of power in the galaxy. But Seojin was not looking at the politicians. She was looking at the cubs who had become her family. At Vrex, standing tall and proud. At Kitha, whose shell still bore faint marks from her premature molting. At Sorn, whose quiet eyes missed nothing. I accept this honor, Seojin said, her voice steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm her, not for what it means to humanity or to politics, but for what it means to me personally. She looked at Sithreka. Your children taught me something that I will carry for the rest of my life. What did they teach you? Sithreka asked. That family is not about blood or species or the shape of our bodies. Seojin replied. Family is about choice, about deciding to stand with someone no matter what comes. She smiled at the cubs. They chose me, and I chose them. And nothing in this galaxy can undo that bond. The ceremony concluded with rituals that were ancient when humanity was still learning to make fire. Seojin received marks on her hands that identified her as Nestkin, and she learned words in the Variks tongue that no human had ever spoken before. But the true significance of the day would only become clear in the years that followed. The Galactic Concord was forced to acknowledge the new alliance between humans and Variks. Thelmari Consortium was censured for their assassination plot, and their influence diminished significantly. Other species began to reconsider their assumptions about both humans and Variks, wondering what other alliances might be possible if they only had the courage to reach across the void. And on Kethvara, something beautiful and unexpected began to grow. Seojin did not return to human space. She remained on the Variks' homeworld as an ambassador, but also as something more personal. She helped raise Vrex, Kitha, and Sorn through the remainder of their youth, teaching them human songs and human stories while they taught her the ways of their people. She was there when Kitha completed her first successful hunt. She was there when Sorn published his first academic treatise on interspecies communication. She was there when Vrex was named as his mother's heir and took his place among the Varric's leadership. 20 years passed like water through Crystal Cavicision's hair turned gray and her movements grew slower, but her eyes still held the same warmth that had first convinced 3 frightened cubs to trust her. She sat now in the garden of the matriarch's palace, watching children play among the crystal flowers. But these were not only Varric's children. Human children ran alongside them, their laughter mixing with the clicks and chirps of their alien friends. The alliance had grown beyond politics and into something deeper human. Families had come to live on Kethvora, and Varric's families had settled on Earth. Marriages had been arranged, not between the species but between their cultures. Families bound by shared meals and shared celebrations and shared griefs. Guardian. Seojin looked up to see Rex approaching. His adult form massive and magnificent, he still called her Guardian, though he now commanded armies, and his word could shake the galaxy. Rex. She smiled. You look troubled. A diplomat from the outer reaches asked me something today, Rex said, settling beside her with the careful grace of a creature aware of his own power. He wanted to know why the mighty Varrix had allied with such a soft and fragile species. What did you tell him? Rex was quiet for a long moment, watching the children play. I told him that humans are not soft, he said finally. I told him that the strongest armor is not chitin or metal, but the choice to protect what you love. He looked at Seongjin with compound eyes that held memories stretching back to a frightened cub and a human who had refused to abandon him. I told him that humans protect what is precious, and that this is what true hunters do. Seojin reached out and laid her weathered hand on Rex's armored limb. Your mother would be proud of you, she said softly. Sitherka had passed 5 years ago, the plague finally claiming her after a decade of fighting. But her legacy lived on in her children and in the alliance she had forged with a single desperate act of trust. She would be proud of you as well. Rex replied. You changed everything, Guardian, and you did it not with armies or weapons but with kindness. Seojin watched as a human child stumbled and fell, only to be gently helped up by a Varrix cub who clicked worried questions until the Fonbix pause. Human laughed and said she was fine. I did not change everything, Seojin said. I just showed what was possible. You showed us that we did not have to be alone. Rex corrected. That was everything. The sun began to set over Kethvora, painting the crystal spires in colors that had no names in any language. Seojin leaned against her former charge, now her protector, and felt the peace that came from knowing she had made a difference. The galaxy was not gentle, and it would never be fully safe, but it was a little less cruel than it had been before, a little more connected, a little more willing to see strangers as potential family rather than potential enemies. And it had started with one human woman who looked at 3 apex predator cubs and saw not monsters, but children who needed help. That was humanity's gift to the stars, not technology, or military might or political cunning, but the simple stubborn belief that anyone, no matter how different or dangerous they seemed, might become family if given the chance. The galaxy had changed forever, and it had changed for the better. The confrontation in the Crystal Forest ended without blood, but not without consequences, and his delegation escorted Seojin and the cubs back to the nest chamber with words of concern and offers of assistance that fooled no one. We will remain to ensure your safety, Quelness had said with that smile that never reached his eyes. The Galactic Concord is deeply concerned about this situation. Now, Seojin paced the nest chamber while the cubs watched her with worried eyes. He means to take us, Rex said. He cannot simply take you, Seojin replied, though she was not entirely certain of that. Your mother entrusted you to my care under Varrix law. Varrix law means nothing to the Concord, Soren said quietly. They have always hated us and always wanted us destroyed. The plague gave them the opportunity they were waiting for. Keitha added, "If we die while in human care, they can blame humanity and use it as reason to attack both our peoples." Seojin stopped pacing and looked at the three cubs, who would somehow become the center of her world in just a few short days. They were so young to understand politics so clearly, but they had grown up as the children of a matriarch, and they had learned early that power was a game played with lives as pieces. "I will not let them take you," she said. "You may not have a choice," Rex replied. The door to the nest chamber opened, and Qualnus entered without announcement or permission. His guards spread out behind him, and Seojin noted that they were armed with weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. "Ambassador Yun," Qualnus said pleasantly, "I have consulted with the Galactic Concord, and we have decided that the cubs must be transferred to a proper care facility." "Proper care facility," Seojin repeated. "You mean a facility controlled by the Thelmari?" "The Consortium has extensive experience in xenobiological care," Qualnus replied smoothly. "We are simply offering our assistance in this difficult time." "I decline your offer." Something cold flickered in Qualnus's eyes, but his smile remained in place. "I am afraid this is not a request, Ambassador, and I am afraid I do not care what you are afraid of." Seojin shot back. "The cubs were entrusted to me by their mother, and I will not surrender them to anyone except her. The matriarch is not here and may never return," Qualnus said. "In her absence, the Galactic Concord has authority over the welfare of sentient Myers. Variks are not signatories to that treaty, a technicality that will be resolved in time." Qualnus waved his hand dismissively. "For now, I invoke the right of competency challenge." Seojin felt ice form in her stomach. She had studied Galactic Concord law during her training, and she knew what a competency challenge meant. "You wish to test whether I am capable of caring for the cubs," she said. "I wish to demonstrate that you are not," Qualnus replied, dropping all pretense of friendliness. "You are a soft, fragile creature from a primitive world, and you have no business pretending to be the guardian of apex predators." "I accept the challenge," Qualnus blinked, clearly having expected more resistance. "You accept. Name your tests," Seojin said. "If I pass, you and your delegation will leave this world immediately. And if you fail, the cubs come with us," Qualnus agreed. "The test will be the traditional Variks trial of guardianship." Rex hissed in alarm. "That trial is meant for adult Variks, not humans." "Then perhaps your human should have considered that before accepting responsibilities beyond her capacity," Qualnus replied sweetly. The trial began at sunset in the great hall of the Matriarch's Palace. Variks from across the city had gathered to witness, their compound eyes gleaming in the bioluminescent light. They had heard rumors of the strange human who cared for their matriarch's cubs, and they had come to see if those rumors held any truth. Qualnus stood on a raised platform with his guards arrayed behind him. "The trial of guardianship tests 3 qualities," he announced. "The ability to feed, the ability to protect, and the ability to command obedience." "I understand," Seojin said calmly. "Begin." The first test seemed simple enough. Seojin was given access to the nest chamber's food storage and told to prepare a meal suitable for molting cubs, but the storage contained dozens of different nutrients, many of which were toxic in the wrong combinations or proportions. One mistake could poison the cubs she was trying to feed. Seojin worked methodically, drawing on everything she had learned over the past days. She remembered which crystals Keitha had sought in the forest and which nutrients Sorn had mentioned were lacking in their shells. She prepared 3 meals, each slightly different to account for the varying needs of cubs at different stages of molting. The cubs ate without hesitation, and when they finished, their shells gleamed with new vitality. "First test passed," announced one of the Variks judges. Reluctant Nicholas' smile grew thinner. "Proceed to the second test." The great hall's doors opened and guards brought in a cage containing one of the Kethrak's predators. Muzzled, but very much alive. A guardian must be able to protect their charges. Qualness said, "Release the beast." The muzzle came off and the Kethrax lunged toward the cubs with murder in its eyes. What happened next was not what Qualness expected. Cubs did not cower behind Seojin, and Seojin did not stand alone. They moved as one. Human and Varric's cubs together, positioning themselves to protect each other. Seojin held a crystal shard in her hand, and the cubs flanked her with claws extended. The Kethrax saw not helpless prey, but a pack that would fight as one. It remembered the forest and the wounds it had taken from this strange group. It backed away. Snarling but unwilling to engage, the guards had to drag it back to its cage. Second test passed. The Varric's judge announced, and this time there was something like approval in its voice. Qualness's composure finally cracked. "This proves nothing," he snapped. "The final test is the true measure of a guardian." He stepped down from his platform and approached the cubs. "A guardian must command obedience," he said. "The cubs must submit willingly to the guardian's authority." He turned to face the assembled crowd. "These are apex predators," he declared. "They are born hunters who instinctively dominate any creature weaker than themselves." He pointed at Seojin. "Look at this human. This soft-flesh creature without fangs or claws or armor." He laughed, and it was an ugly sound. What apex predator would ever submit to something so weak? The crowd stirred, and Seojin felt the weight of every doubt and every prejudice pressing against. Hercules was right about one thing by every measure the galaxy used. She was weaker than the cubs she claimed to protect. "Vrex, Keitha Sorn," Qualness called out. "Choose now who you will follow." The cubs looked at each other, and then they looked at Seojin. Thought of the night she had stayed awake to help Keitha molt, of the song she had sung to soothe their fears, of the moment she had charged toward predators to give them time to escape. They thought of every time she had chosen them over her own safety. Rex stepped forward, and the crowd held its breath. Walked past Qualness without a glance and stopped in front of Seojin. He lowered his head in the gesture of submission and trust that Varric's reserved only for those they honored above all others. Keitha followed. Then Sorn 3 apex predator cubs knelt before a human woman, and the galaxy had never seen anything like it. "She is our guardian," Vrex said in a voice that carried through the great hall. "She earned our trust with her actions and our loyalty with her love. We choose her." Sorn added, "Now and always." Keitha finished. Quellis stood frozen, his plans crumbling around him. A commotion arose at the back of the hall, and the crowd parted to reveal a sight that made Seojin's heart soar. Sithrika had returned. The matriarch moved through her people like a storm given form. Wounded but unbowed, she had watched everything through the den's transmitters as she had driven herself and her hunters to the breaking point to return in time. "Qualness of the Thelmari," Sithrika's voice echoed through the hall like thunder. "You have been judged and found wanting. This changes nothing." Qualness sputtered. "The Concord will hear of this. The Concord will hear of many things," Sithrika replied coldly, "including the assassination drones we found in your ship's cargo hold." The color drained from Qualness's face. "That is a lie. My warriors are very thorough," Sithrika said, "and your people are very careless." She turned to her guards. "Detain them. They will answer for their crimes." As Qualness was dragged away screaming about diplomatic immunity, Sithrika approached Seojin and her cubs. The matriarch looked at the human who had protected her children against all odds. "You have done more than I asked," Sithrika said quietly. "You have done more than I dared hope." Seojin smiled, exhaustion and relief washing over her in equal measure. "They are easy to love," she said, "once you get past the fangs." The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself could travel. A human was caring for Varric's cubs in the halls of the Galactic Concord. Species that had warred with each other for millennia found themselves united in shock and outrage. The Variks were monsters according to every historical record, and humans were reckless primitives who barely deserved a seat at the galactic table. That these two species had found common ground was unthinkable, and more than a few ambassadors saw it as a threat. Sciogin knew none of this as she prepared to take the cubs outside the nest chamber for the first time. They need crystalline nutrients that can only be found in the forest, Soren had explained, showing her the readouts on his own weakening shell. Without them, our new chitin will be brittle and weak. Then we go to the forest. Sciogin had replied simply. The journey through the crystal corridors was different now than it had been when Sithreka led her through them. The Variks they passed stared at the strange procession with compound eyes that held confusion and suspicion, and something that might have been hope. A human walking freely among apex predator cubs who showed no sign of wanting to eat her was apparently unprecedented. Variks walked at Sciogins' right side, and Soren at her left, while Keitha rode on Sciogins' back, still too weak from her molting to travel far on her own limbs. The adults are watching us, Variks said quietly. Let them watch. Sciogin replied. We have nothing to hide. The crystalline forest of Kethvora was unlike anything Sciogin had ever seen. Massive structures of living crystal rose from the ground like trees, their branches singing with harmonics as the wind passed through them. The ground was carpeted with smaller crystals that chimed beneath their feet like bells. It is beautiful, Sciogin breathed. It is home, Soren said simply, but there was pride in his voice. The cubs began to search for the specific crystals they needed, using senses that Sciogin could not comprehend to locate nutrition hidden within the glittering landscape. She watched them work and saw for the first time what Variks' hunting instincts looked like in action. They moved like shadows given form. Utterly silent despite their size, they communicated through clicks and gestures that were almost too fast for her eyes to follow. They were beautiful and terrifying and utterly alien, and Sciogin loved them with a fierceness that surprised her. Guardian, Keitha said from her perch on Sciogins' back. Something is coming. Sciogin froze and listened, but she could hear nothing beyond the singing of the crystal forest. What do your senses tell you? She asked. 6 creatures approaching from the western ridge, Variks reported, his body tensing into a fighting stance. They are Kethraks, native predators that hunt molting cubs. They have our scent, Soren added grimly. Keitha's molting fluid left a trail. Sciogins' mind raced through options and found none that were good. She could not fight 6 alien predators, and neither could 3 cubs, who were weakened by stress and malnutrition. Running would only trigger a chase, and the Kethraks were surely faster than a human carrying an injured child. How do Variks normally handle this threat? She asked. Adults kill them, Variks said. Cubs hide until adults arrive, but there are no adults coming. No. The first Kethraks emerged from behind a crystal formation, and Sciogin felt her blood run cold. It was built like a nightmare, all razor limbs and snapping jaws. Easily 3 times her size. 5 more followed it, spreading out to cut off any escape. Get behind me, Sciogin said to the cubs. They will eat you first, Variks protested. Maybe, Sciogin agreed. But eating me will slow them down and give you time to run. We will not leave you, Keitha said fiercely from her back. You are our guardian. The Kethraks pack began to advance, and Sciogin made the only choice she could make. She made herself the target. She charged toward the nearest Kethraks, screaming at the top of her lungs, and waving her arms like a madwoman. The predator reared back in surprise at this tiny creature that dared to attack rather than flee. Sciogin did not try to fight it because she knew that would mean instant death. Instead, she ran past it and kept running, drawing the pack's attention away from the cubs. Run, she shouted over her shoulder. Find shelter and hide. But the cubs did not run. Variks watched the human who had stayed with them through the long night risk her life to save them. and something ancient and powerful stirred in his heart. She was not prey fleeing from predators. She was a guardian protecting her young sisters. "Brothers," he said, using the ancient words of pack bonding that his mother had taught him, "we hunt together." He launched himself at the nearest Kethrax with a war cry that echoed through the crystal forest. Sorn and Keitha followed without hesitation. Keitha leaping from Seojin's back to join the fight despite her weakness. What followed was chaos and terror and something that no Varix had ever witnessed before. A human and 3 cubs fought side by side against predators that should have killed them easily. They had no coordination and no training and no hope of victory by any rational measure. But they had something else. They had each other. Seojin found herself fighting back-to-back with Vrex, using a crystal shard as a makeshift weapon while the young Varix's claws and fangs dealt real damage. Sorn protected his weakened sister, while Kitha fought with a ferocity that belied her fragile state. One Kethrax fell, and then another, and then the remaining 4 decided that this prey was not worth the cost. They fled into the forest, leaving behind silence and exhaustion, and Victoriza Yojin collapsed against a crystal formation. Her body shaking with adrenaline and relief. Blood ran from a dozen small wounds where Kethrax's claws had found her flesh. "You could have escaped while they chased us," Rex said, his voice strange. "They would have killed you," Seojin replied. "You could have escaped," he repeated. "Why did you not?" Seojin looked at the 3 cubs who had fought beside her and who were now looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Because you are my responsibility," she said simply. "Because I would rather die protecting you than live having abandoned you." "This is not how prey behaves," Sorn said quietly. "No," Seojin agreed. "This is how family behaves." The word hung in the air between them, and Seojin saw something shift in the cub's eyes. They had called her guardian before, but that was just a word, a title given by their mother. This was different. This was earned. New sound interrupted the moment. The whine of engines descending through the crystal canopy. A ship was landing nearby, a sleek vessel bearing markings that Seojin did not recognize. Thelmari. Rex spat the word like a curse. "Our mother's enemies. They have come to help," Sorn said, but his voice was uncertain. "They have come to take us." The ship's hatch opened and a delegation of tall, thin aliens emerged. Their leader approached with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Ambassador Yoon," he said smoothly. "I am Arbitrator Quellness of the Thelmari Consortium, and I have come to rescue you from this dangerous situation." Seojin rose to her feet and placed herself between the Thelmari and the cubs. "I do not need rescue," she said, "and neither do they. Surely you cannot mean to remain here," Quellness said, his smile faltering slightly. "These creatures are dangerous and unpredictable." "These creatures are children," Seojin replied coldly, "and they are under my protection." Quellness's eyes flickered to the cubs, and Seojin saw something there that made her blood run cold. She saw calculation, and she saw hunger, and she saw the look of a predator who had found vulnerable prey. The Thelmari had not come to rescue anyone. They had come to ensure that the Varix cubs did not survive. Rex moved toward her with the fluid grace of a born killer, and every instinct in Seojin's body screamed at her to run. She did not run. She had learned long ago that running from predators only triggered their chase instinct, and she had also learned something else. She had learned that frightened creatures often attacked what they feared most. "I am not your enemy," she said quietly, keeping her voice calm and steady, even as her heart pounded against her ribs. "I am not prey either." Rex paused and tilted his head in a gesture that looked almost curious. "What are you then?" The translation system rendered his clicking vocalizations. "I am your guardian," Seojin replied. "Your mother asked me to care for you until she returns. Mother left us with soft flesh." Rex spat the words like poison. "Mother thinks we are weak. Your mother thinks you are precious," Seojin corrected gently. She trusted me with the most important things in her world because she had no other choice. Kitha made a small sound from the nest, and Seojin saw that the smallest cub was trembling. Soren had not moved at all, watching everything with eyes that seemed far too old for such a young creature. Evrex held his aggressive posture for a long moment, and then something shifted. He did not relax exactly, but he stopped advancing, and his fangs retracted slightly. "You do not smell like fear," he said, and there was confusion in his voice. "I am afraid," Seojin admitted, "but I will not let my fear make me run from children who need help." She moved slowly toward the nest, giving Rex plenty of space to decide whether he would allow watched her, but did not attack, and Seojin counted that as a small victory. Akitha was in bad shape, and Seojin did not need medical training to see it, that small cub's chitin had taken on a grayish hue, and she was making soft clicking sounds that the translator identified as distress vocalizations. "When did she last eat?" Seojin asked. "Before the nest guardians died." Soren spoke for the first time, his voice quiet and precise. 4 days ago." 4 days without food for growing cubs who were supposed to eat every few hours during molting season. Seojin felt anger rise in her chest at the Galactic Concord that had refused to help, at the plague that had stolen so many Varric's lives, at the cruelty of a universe that let children suffer. "There is food prepared in the storage unit," she said, remembering Sithrika's instructions. "Why have you not eaten?" The cubs exchanged glances, and Seojin saw something she recognized. She saw shame. "We cannot," Rex admitted finally. "Our bodies rejected. Because you are too frightened to digest," Seojin said, understanding flooding through her stress-induced. Appetite loss was common in many species, and it seemed the Varrics were no exception. "You need to feel safe before you can eat." "We do not feel safe," Soren said simply. "The nest guardians are gone, and the adults are dying, and strangers walk our halls. We are alone." Kitha whimpered. Seojin made a decision then, and it was perhaps the most important decision of her life. She sat down on the floor of the nest chamber and folded her legs beneath her, and made herself as small and unthreatening as possible. "You are not alone," she said. "I am here and I am not leaving. You cannot protect us," Rex said. "You have no claws and no fangs and no armor." "No," Seojin agreed. "But I have hands that can help you molt, and a voice that can soothe you, and a heart that will not give up on you." She began to hum. It was an old song that her grandmother had sung to her when she was small. A Korean lullaby about the moon and the stars and the love that held families together across any distance. The cubs went very still. "Why is that sound?" Kitha asked, her trembling slowing slightly. "It is how humans comfort their young," Seojin explained. "We make music with our voices." She pressed her palm flat against the stone floor and continued to hum, letting the vibrations travel through the rock itself. Soren crept closer, drawn by something he could not name. "I can feel it," he said with wonder in his voice. "It moves through the stone." "Sound is vibration," Seojin said, "and vibration can be felt as well as heard." She hummed louder, letting the sound fill the chamber, and she watched as the tension slowly drained from the cub's body. Skitha was the first to approach her, moving on unsteady limbs to press against Seojin's side. Her chitin was hot to the touch, far hotter than it should be. "She is molting," Soren said with alarm. "It is too early, and her body is not ready." Premature molting was dangerous. According to the briefings Seojin had studied, the process required enormous energy, and improper shedding could leave permanent damage or even kill. "Then we help her through it," Seojin said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Tell me what to do." The night that followed was the longest of Seojin's life. Kitha's old chitin began to crack and separate from her body, but the new shell beneath was not fully formed, and every movement caused the small cub agony. Seojin worked with gentle hands, carefully peeling away dead carapace. When it was ready, and supporting Keitha through contractions of pain that made the cub scream. Rex and Soren stayed close, their earlier hostility forgotten in their fear for their sister. "Will she die?" Rex asked at some point in the darkness. "Not if I can help it," Seojin replied. She did not sleep, and she did not rest, and she did not leave. Keitha sighed for even a moment. When the small cub whimpered, she hummed soothing melodies, and when the pain grew too great, she held Keitha against her chest and rocked. And the way she had seen human mothers rock their babies dawn came slowly to Kethvora. The dying sun sending weak rays through the crystal walls of the nest chamber. Keitha lay exhausted but alive. Her new chitin pale and soft but intact. She had survived. "You stayed," Rex said, and there was something new in his voice. "I told you I would. Others have told us things and then left," Soren said quietly. "The Nest Guardians said they would always be here, and then they died." Seojin's heart broke for these children who had learned so young that promises could be broken by forces beyond anyone's control. "I cannot promise that I will never die," she said honestly, "but I can promise that I will never choose to leave you." A chime sounded in the chamber, and a holographic display activated, showing a transmission from Stithrika's hunting party. The matriarch's face appeared, but something was wrong. Her carapace was cracked and leaking fluid, and her movements were slow and pained. "Ambassador Yoon," Stithrika said, her voice weak in ways that it had not been before. "Our party was ambushed by raiders who seek to take advantage of our weakness." "Are you injured?" Seojin asked, though she could see the answer clearly. "I will survive, but I cannot return for 3 more days," Stithrika replied. "The cubs, are they well?" "Keitha molted early, but she survived," Seojin reported. "They are all alive, and I will keep them that way." Stithrika was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried emotions that Seojin had not heard from her before. "I chose better than I knew when I chose you, human." The transmission ended, and Seojin turned to find all 3 cubs watching her. Rex stepped forward and lowered his head in a gesture that the translator identified as submission and trust. "Teach us your songs, Guardian," he said. "We wish to learn." Seojin smiled and began to hum, and in a nest chamber on a dying world, 3 apex predator cubs learned their first human lullaby. The ship descended through clouds of purple mist, and Yoon Seojin pressed her face against the viewport, like a child seeing snow for the first time. Kethvora stretched beneath her in shades of violet and black, a world of crystalline forests that caught the dim light of a dying sun and scattered it into 1,000 fractured rainbows. She had read the reports and studied the briefings and memorized every scrap of information humanity possessed about the Variks. But nothing had prepared her for the raw alien beauty of their homeworld. "Ambassador, I must once again advise against this mission," Captain Wan said from behind her, his voice tight with worry that he could not quite hide. Seojin turned and offered him a small smile that she hoped looked more confident than she felt. "Your objection is noted, Captain. The Variks have killed more sentient beings than any other species in recorded galactic history." He continued as if she had not spoken at all. "They conquered 17 star systems, and they did not do it through diplomacy. And yet they asked for our help." Seojin replied quietly, "That has to mean something." The landing pad rose to meet them through the mist, and Seojin gathered her courage like armor around her heart. She was humanity's first ambassador to the Variks, a position that no one else had wanted and that she had accepted because she believed in something that most of her colleagues thought was naive. She believed that even monsters could be understood. The Variks delegation waited at the edge of the landing pad, and Seojin felt her breath catch in her throat at the sight of them. They were magnificent in the way that ancient predators were magnificent. All sleek chitin and gleaming fangs and eyes that burned with cold intelligence. 8 limbs carried each of them with fluid grace, and their armored bodies seemed to absorb the light itself. At their center stood the largest Varik Seojin had ever seen. her carapace marked with patterns of gold that indicated the highest rank High Matriarch Sith-Rekka, ruler of 17 worlds and commander of the deadliest military force in the known galaxy. "You are smaller than I expected," Sith-Rekka said, and her voice resonated through translation devices with harmonics that made Seojin's bones vibrate. "Most species are smaller than Varix," Seojin replied, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "It does not make us less." Something flickered in Sith-Rekka's compound eyes. Something that might have been amusement or approval or simply curiosity. "Come," the matriarch commanded. "We will speak in private." She turned and moved toward the towering spires of the Varix capital, without waiting to see if Seojin would follow Seojin. Followed the journey through the crystal corridors. Took nearly an hour, and Seojin used every moment to observe and learn. She saw Varix warriors drilling in vast chambers, and she saw workers tending to strange organic machinery, and she saw something else that surprised her. She saw Fearit lived in the way the Varix moved, in the tension that ran through their bodies, in the way they glanced at shadows as if expecting death to emerge from them. Something was very wrong on Kethvari Sithrak, led her to a private chamber high in the central spire, and sealed the door behind them with a gesture that seemed almost desperate. "You wonder why I summoned humans," the matriarch said. "All the galaxy wonders." Seojin nodded but said nothing, sensing that Sith-Rekka needed to tell this story in her own way. "A plague came to us 3 cycles ago," Sith-Rekka continued, and for the first time her voice carried something other than cold authority. "It kills only adults, and it kills slowly, stealing strength before it takes life." She moved to a viewport and stared out at her dying world. "Half my people are gone, and half of those who remain are dying. I'm sorry," Seojin said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "The Galactic Concord refused our requests for aid." Sith-Rekka's voice turned bitter. "They said the plague was divine justice for our conquests, and that they would pray for our suffering to be brief." Seojin felt anger kindle in her chest at the cruelty of that response. Humanity did not receive that message. She said carefully, "We received only your request for diplomatic contact." Sith-Rekka turned to face her, and something in the matriarch's posture shifted. "I did not summon you for diplomacy, Ambassador Yoon." "Then why am I here?" "Because I need something that no Varix can provide," Sith-Rekka said. "Because I have heard stories of humans and their strange ways, and I have run out of other options." She pressed a panel on the wall, and a hidden door slid open to reveal a smaller chamber beyond. "I need someone to care for my children." Seojin stepped forward and saw them for the first time. 3 Varix cubs huddled together in a nest of soft materials, their chitons still pale and flexible with youth. They were perhaps a quarter of adult size, and their eyes held the universal look of frightened children everywhere. "Their names are Rex, Kitha, and Sorn," Sith-Rekka said, and her voice cracked with emotion she could not hide. "They are all I have left of my mate, and they are dying. Dying," Seojin repeated, her heart clenching with sudden urgency. "They need constant care during their molting phase, but all the nest guardians are dead or dying." Sith-Rekka explained, "I must lead the hunt to gather food for the colony, or we all starve. But if I leave them alone, they will not survive." She turned to face Seojin fully, and the ambassador saw something she never expected to see in the eyes of an apex predator. She saw a mother's desperation. "No species has ever been trusted with Varix young," Sith-Rekka said. "To harm them means war without end, and to fail them means their deaths." "Why me?" Seojin asked. "Why humans?" "Because your species is known for one thing above all others," Sith-Rekka replied. "You protect young that are not your own, and you do it without thought of reward or alliance or gain." She gestured toward the cubs. "I have watched your people, Ambassador, and I have seen human soldiers die to protect alien children from threats, And I've seen human medics work until they collapsed to save young of species that hated them. Her voice dropped low. I'm asking you to do what humans do best. Seojin looked at the cubs, and she saw Rex raise his head to stare at her with eyes full of fear and hostility. She saw Kida press closer to her siblings, and she saw Sorn watch her with cautious intelligence. They were alien in every way that mattered. And they were also just children who had lost everything. How long will you be gone? She asked. 3 days. Perhaps 4. I will do it. Seojin said. Sithreka went very still. You accept without negotiation, without demands. They are children. Seojin replied simply. They need help, and I can provide it. Something changed in Sithreka's bearing, and when she spoke again, her voice held a note of respect that had not been there before. The nest chamber is everything you need, and the systems will translate their vocalizations for you. She moved toward the door and then paused. I must warn you of something. Ambassador. Yes. Varric's cubs do not accept strangers easily, Sithreka said. Their instincts tell them that creatures unlike themselves are either predators to flee or prey to hunt. She looked back at Seojin with eyes that held both hope and fear. If they do not accept you by nightfall, they will try to eat you. She was gone before Seojin could respond. The door sealed behind her, and Seojin was alone with 3 apex predator cubs who were staring at her with growing interest. Rex rose to his full height and spread his limbs in what the translation system identified as a dominance display. His fangs glistened with venom that could kill a human in minutes. This is their nature. Sithreka had said. Seojin took a deep breath and stepped forward to meet her fate.